Welcome to Friday. Yes, it's Friday the 13th, 2026. When tragedy strikes, Wyoming knows to contact Grant Lawson and the law firm for truck safety. Fierce advocate for justice and fighting for safer roads around the USA. Visit truckaccidents.com and see how Grant and his team make the difference. Yes, it is Friday the 13th. Is the weather looking scary? Well, I guess it depends on your perspective. But overall, what we're going to see is a storm move across the southern plains and the southern Rockies this weekend. There's kind of a little bit of a gap, but there is still going to be some weather today and into this evening across some parts of the central Rockies. A nice covering of fresh snow in the California mountains, and this is the first of many waves that'll be bringing California moisture. So what we're going to see is still the remnants of the system that came through yesterday, producing still a little bit of precipitation across the central and southern Rockies out into the southern plains. Generally speaking, mild Pacific air will be flooding the west, so that'll keep temperatures above average through the weekend. That big upper level low is settling along the west coast. But what's going to happen, we alluded to this yesterday, is the trough's going to kind of settle in. There's a stalling pattern with the high to the west in the Pacific, the low right along the west coast, but pieces of energy will break off from the main low and will cut across the Rockies, the Continental Divide, and out into the plains. We see two of these waves next week. One coming through on Tuesday. There's another wave around Thursday. Now, there's going to end up being some precipitation and winter weather getting east of the Continental Divide. So we're beginning to see the signs of that. Is this going to end up being the week of the big storm for the plains? No, but we are going to see some systems having an opportunity. And as we've been talking all week, the high country is going to really benefit from this pattern. Speaking of which, at the end of the podcast, I'm going to update the snowpack and have a bit of a snowpack discussion. There's some great stuff that came out in the past week from the Colorado Climate Center folks, taking a look at a historical perspective of this bad snowpack year and how does it compare to other years. Is this the worst snowpack ever, at least in terms of us being able to measure? Well, stay tuned. You got to watch till the end to find out. Beautiful shot there of a sundog up in Bethel, Alaska, where it has gotten very cold again. A beautiful shot there, Aaron. Thanks for sending that in. So, hey, we've got a California snow-covered mountains. Got a great shot of an Arctic situation up there in Alaska, then brown prairie out across southeastern Wyoming. Now, we did have some precipitation get to some areas yesterday, and how many of you out there, raise your hand if you heard thunder? There were several areas across Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, down into Arizona, New Mexico, where we had lightning strikes yesterday, and that's something that's probably going to happen next week as well. The satellite photos this morning show a really good example. If you remember a week ago, I talked about wave trains beginning to form where you have lows lined up. Well, here's a low, here's a low, here's that big high that's right here. There's a little high in between here, and then there's another low here. But you can certainly see we've got a wave trade going on of these systems going up over the high, then down the west coast. And so we're seeing that pattern going, and you can see on the water vapor this very, very well. In between the systems, you have clear conditions, not much going on, but you can see there's still a good amount of Pacific moisture that's coming through the region today, and this is still going to produce a little bit of weather. There you can see it, the low system just about over Las Vegas, the center of the upper level low today. This system is going to head out east like this, and by Sunday, it's going to head out across the southeastern United States, producing rain and thunderstorms across the deep south. We have this little high pressure in between the waves, and this is going to be kind of giving us a pretty mild Valentine's weekend, especially as we get on into Sunday and Monday with the big high pressure ridge there. And then here's the west coast low reloading again, coming down the west coast and curving westward first before curving back to the east early next week. So precipitation, this is from today through Sunday. So there's going to be some moisture still in the form of some showers, and yes, even some thunderstorms with some high country snow again in this area here. Then you can see Far southern Colorado, northern New Mexico, Kansas, and Oklahoma and Texas getting some needed rain. Maybe getting up to the Nebraska border, but you can see the Dakotas, eastern Montana, most of Wyoming, most of Nebraska, into the northwest Corn Belt. Nothing going on here again, but we do have that moisture here. Then we see the next storm here approaching the west coast. So between now and the end of Sunday, more snow for the Colorado ski areas, even Angel Fire down in New Mexico and down into the rim country of Arizona, with the Pacific Northwest getting some more moisture there. By Monday, we see that low heading off the east coast, and here we go, we're reloading. So what we have here by Monday is the next low coming in. It's going to be a kicker. Remember, when a low comes in, it kicks out the one down ahead of it. And we're going to be talking about these kickers constantly here over the next week or two, because we have kicker systems going over this high, which just remains stuck right there. So these lows will come up, over and down, and each time one comes down, it kicks one out. So as we start next week, very mild southwest flow, so air out of the deserts will keep temperatures very mild, very spring-like, well into the early portions of next week. But the first ejection is going to be a fairly good low. And yesterday I showed you what we call the vorticity charts, to where we have this area of rising motion and instability, and just downwind of the vorticity maximums is where you get the lines of precipitation. So Monday, we have heavy precipitation hitting California. By Tuesday, that system rapidly moves out. You can see it get kicked out. There's a gap. There's always going to be a gap before the next system comes into the west coast. We're going to see along this boundary, Monday night and Tuesday, a line of showers, thunderstorms, and a really good potential. It's going to be a quick mover, but it will drop a quick shot of heavy snow into the mountains. And these little waves like this can cause travel problems, especially along the higher elevations of Interstate 80, Interstate 70. By Wednesday, that low gets kicked out into the upper plains. And we alluded to this yesterday. These little systems getting kicked out like this can end up producing some pretty good winter events as it hits the northern plains, and we see that. So if we look at the cumulative precipitation through Wednesday, you see this area right here, we could end up with a pretty good snow event for North Dakota, parts of south central Canada, eastern Montana, and don't be surprised if it maybe ends up coming a little back further to the south and west. And there you can see the flow of moisture. This is the 4-day period for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So you can see it coming on in very, very nicely, and the mountains picking up more precipitation. So we'll need to watch up here. We could have a little bit of a mini snowstorm for North Dakota, parts of South Dakota, Minnesota, eastern Montana. And again, this area is not out of the question of it wrapping back a little bit. And you can see the Pacific flow going to do very well for the mountains. Here's the next wave getting kicked out by this one. See how this works? This next one get kicked out. This one is going to be moist and rather robust, and the results may be somewhat similar, but the placement of the precipitation may be a bit more south. The high remains, but we have more systems queued up to come in. So it's going to stay very busy. There's no indication that this configuration right here is going to change much at all, at least for another 7 to 10 days, maybe longer than that. So this low will likely get kicked through the weekend after this one. So it's going to be a busy pattern, especially for the high country. And you can see the vorticity map on Thursday brings that next wave through. But you can see there's some southern, system has a little bit more of a southern extent to it. And then here comes the next one. So there will be things to talk about here over the next 7 to 10 days. Now, speaking of something to talk about, now we're into the snowpack portion. This is snowpack as of the end of the 11th across the Intermountain West. Wherever you see red, snowpack is 50% or less. Just awful. Where you see orange, it isn't much better. Not until you get to yellow and green do you have snowpack conditions that are anywhere close to being decent. Now I'm going to focus on Colorado and Wyoming because that's the two sets of data that I'm going to show you. So this was snowpack conditions as of midnight this past night. So you can see the South Platte is awful, the North Platte Actually, these numbers have increased slightly over the last 2 days because of what's come on in. But you can see southern Colorado in a really, really bad state. And the headwaters of the Colorado in a very bad state, as well as the Gunnison. Now, Wyoming's better, but looks like somebody is doing one of those paint by number kits. We've got different colors all over the place. As you get east of the Continental Divide, obviously conditions are worse, especially the lower North Platte. The upper North Platte actually has gone up a few percentage points because of recent snow events. Only in Wyoming, really in the Intermountain West, anywhere do we have green or blue. And a lot of this snow fell in December and early parts of January. Not much since then. But you can see we've got a hodgepodge in Wyoming, but the overall general message, snowpack is awful, just very awful. Now I want to give a hat tip to the Colorado Climate Center. Russ Schumacher here posted a really, really good article. You can find it here. So some of the data I'm going to show you is from his article. I think you're going to be surprised by what you're hearing here, because I'm already hearing, and I hear this a lot, I've never seen anything like this. This has never happened before. I've talked to the old-timer ranchers who've never seen this ever. Well, I have to tell you, I'm always skeptical of those comments because I don't live in the world of anecdotes. I have to live in the world of data. Anecdotes don't mean anything unless data backs it up. That's not a criticism. That's just how people perceive weather and climate. Tends to be, what have you done for me lately? And you tend to forget about historical patterns. And I'm going to show you that here in a moment. So yes, current conditions in the snowpack conditions of Colorado and many areas of the West is the worst that we've seen to date. Now keep in mind, as you'll see in the graph here, snowpack usually reaches its peak in terms of depth right around here, which is right around the early parts of April. Although you can see from this graph, you can certainly add to snowpack in April and into May as well. So this graph shows the record lowest snowpack since 1987. Now, keep in mind, the SnowTel snowpack sensors have not been in place. They got in place late 70s and early 80s. So the data that we have before then is where folks went out in snowshoes and snow sticks and did it the old-fashioned way. So we don't have great snowpack data that goes very far back, at least in terms of where we have remote sensors. So that needs to be said. But we are certainly trending to have one of the worst snowpack years on record. Will it end up being the worst snowpack year on record? Possibly. I don't think it's going to be, based on the patterns that we're seeing to evolving right now. But yes, everything you've been hearing, everything you've been observing, no doubt this has been an awful, just awful snowpack year due to the lack of storms, due to the fact it's been a very warm winter so far in the West. But how does this line up, at least to date, to other years that were bad? Well, this graph right here shows 50 years of records. Now, again, some of these records are from the old-fashioned ways of measuring. So as of February 1st, these were the lowest snow water equivalents. We'll call that SWE, S-W-E. So you can see, yes, there's some 2026s in here as of February 1st that are at some of the lowest levels. But notice there are two other years that show up a lot here, 1977 and 1981, for good measure, and you'll see why here in a minute. So if you were to look at 20 snow courses going back to around 1940 to present, you can see we had 2 years that were actually very close together, 1977, 1981. You can see that those snowpack years were awful. And what was really bad about this is that they were back-to-back. They were not back-to-back year to year, but within a 5-year time span. And a lot of this was before a lot of the ski areas had snowmaking. Was there a lot of panic then? Yes. Kind of like there's a lot of panic now. But one thing I want you to recognize from this graph is something I harp on all the time, which is interannual variability. In the Intermountain West, you do not have year-to-year similarities in how the snow falls. This graph represents it greatly. You have peaks, you have valleys. You have big snowpack years, you have bad snowpack years. Yes, you have years that would be, quote, average, but remember, averages are just, you take the extremes and you average them together. So an average is, bad years like this, averaged with bad years like this. But how often do we have years that end up right at the average line? You don't. So interannual variability is something we live with in the Intermountain West because we're so far from our water sources. We're very susceptible to what goes on into the Pacific. So expecting the snowpack to be the same every year, year in and year out, just does not happen. It just doesn't. You have these wide fluctuations, which makes it extremely difficult to seasonal forecast. You could end up having a really bad snowpack year and think, oh, this is how it's going to be forever. Well, this graph shows you no, you do come back, but you have peaks and you have valleys. And this goes all the way back to snow courses that go back to 1940. Now, I want to show you something. I'm using Cheyenne as a proxy. One, because I'm very familiar with this area, but it's a good proxy for the plains because Cheyenne is not in the mountains. It's not exactly in the middle of the plains. It's kind of at that interface and kind of gives you a good gauge of what's going on. So I just want to show you a few things that you might find interesting. The worst snowfall year was the year of 65-66. Cheyenne only got 13.1 inches of snow. Cheyenne right now is at 7.6. And that lines up with places like Casper. That lines up with places like Cody. That lines up with places like Denver. So it's a good data point to use. Look what happened in the two really bad snowpack years. Look how similar the snow totals were, just short of 30 inches. And we're probably on track for something similar to that. What you notice is very low snow in December, very low snow in January, very low snow in February, and then you get more snow in March and April. But even then, it was hard to catch up. So on the plains, Cheyenne represents what was a really bad snowpack year in the mountains very, very well. But you want to know what the snowiest winter on record in Cheyenne is? The snow year of 79 and 80. So just 2 years after a very poor snow year, you had your biggest snow year. This goes back to this graph right here, the interannual variability. So let's do the same thing with Cheyenne's annual snowfall. Looks similar to this, doesn't it? Interannual variability. So if you're expecting, especially if you're new to the West, if you're expecting that every winter should be the same or similar to the previous winter, especially with precipitation, it just doesn't happen. But our perceptions tend to be set about either a big snow year or a bad snow year. You tend to remember those. Getting those years that are in the middle, they happen. Now, this is where graphs can be very deceiving. I threw a trend line on here, just a linear trend line. It actually shows that since 1936, Cheyenne's snowfall has been increasing slightly. Maybe. But that really doesn't give you anything good because that trend line is biased by the bad years and the really good years with snowfall. So you have to take everything into account, not only what's happening in the present, but what's happened in the past. So we are on track to obviously a really bad snowpack year, but we've seen it before. I think it's safe to say, and this is what the Colorado Climate Center says in their article, and I completely agree with them, that this is the worst snowpack season in 40 years, 4 decades. So it is remarkable. It does stand out, but the snowpack year of 77 and that snowpack year of 81 is similar. So it has happened before. Have yourself a good weekend. We'll have plenty to talk about on Monday.